Today, we become legends.
Smite 2's alpha is going 24/7 in roughly a week from now, and it's time to start my guide series. This time we'll be taking a look at Smite 2's hidden mechanics. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe for more guides coming soon once I can get my hands on the game 24/7. Okay, so first up we have some lifesteal mechanics which have actually changed quite substantially from how Smite 1 managed lifesteal. First up, lifesteal is now just lifesteal. There's no longer physical and magical lifesteal, as any god can build any item. With there being no distinction here, any god can now also lifesteal with abilities through normal lifesteal, even if they were a physical god in Smite 1. Basically, for magicals from Smite 1, not that much has changed, but for physicals from Smite 1, every lifesteal item works like Soul Eater now. Another major change from how Smite 1 handled things is that there is no longer an AoE lifesteal reduction in Smite 2. For those unaware, in Smite 1, any ability that could hit multiple targets, regardless of if you actually did hit multiple targets with it, would only get 1/3 lifesteal value. This basically means you needed to hit 3 targets just to break even on normal single target lifesteal numbers. This is completely gone in Smite 2. You get full value for every target you hit with AoE abilities. You might think that's going to be insane for passive healing off minion waves, where you can now get 6 times value where you would only get 2 times value in Smite 1, but you now only lifesteal 1/3 off of non-god targets in Smite 2, so effectively the lifesteal off minions, jungle monsters and jungle bosses is the same, but you now heal 3 times more per target from hitting gods with AoE lifestealing abilities. Alright, moving on though, next up is cooldown rate, which is another mechanic that has been reworked going into Smite 2. In Smite 1, cooldown was given as a percentage and reduced your cooldowns by that percentage, with a normal cap of 40%. However, in Smite 2, cooldown rate is given as a flat number that goes into this formula, and now has no cap on how much you can build. Uncapped cooldown, isn't that going to be broken? Well, no. Some of you may recognize this formula as the protections and mitigations equation from Smite 1, and this formula has built-in diminishing returns, meaning that every point of cooldown rate you buy after the first is less valuable. Plugging in your current cooldown rate to this formula gives you a multiplier for your ability cooldowns equivalent to Smite 1's CDR system. For example, at 10 cooldown rate, the formula simplifies to 100 over 110, which is 0.91 or a 9% reduction to your cooldowns. At 50 cooldown rate, it's 100 over 150 or 0.66 recurring or a 33% reduction to your cooldowns, and at 100 cooldown rate, it's 100 over 200 or 0.5, a 50% reduction to your cooldowns. You can see the diminishing returns at work here, since going from 0 cooldown rate to 50 reduces your cooldowns by 33%, but adding another 50 for a total of 100 cooldown rate only reduces your cooldowns by a further 17%. Add another 50 for a total of 150 and your cooldowns are only reduced by 10% further. So to summarize, in Smite 2 you're no longer working around a cap on cooldown reduction. You can technically go as low as you want, but you're working around the diminishing returns in order to find a reasonable amount of cooldown rate that gets you good reductions without over-investing in it and harming the rest of your build for very little gain. As I've just shown though, you can make ridiculous cooldown builds in Smite 2 if you want to. At 200 cooldown rate, your effective cooldown reduction is 75%, something completely unachievable in Smite 1. However, as I mentioned, investing so heavily into cooldown rate comes with opportunity cost in other aspects of your build, such as damage, lifesteal, tankiness, utility, etc. One final note with cooldown rate is that items with flat reductions to cooldowns like Chronos Pendant or Pendulum Blade become more valuable the more cooldown rate you have, since if your base cooldowns are at 4 seconds, Pendant's effect is reducing them by 1/4. But if your base cooldowns are at 10 seconds, it's only reducing them by 1/10. So stacking these flat reduction items on top of massive cooldown rate could be very powerful. Okay, on the topic of diminishing returns, let's go over protections and mitigations, which actually haven't changed at all going into Smite 2 from how they worked in Smite 1. They follow the same formula that cooldown rate now follows, 100 over 100 plus prots, and of course having diminishing returns built in. I won't spend too long on this since I just explained the formula in the cooldown rate section and it's unchanged from Smite 1, but one major thing to note is the concept of effective health. Since protections reduce your damage taken by a percentage, it means you can take more raw damage pre-mitigation before you die. At 100 protections, damage taken is halved, so if you have 2000 health at 0 protections, it takes 2000 damage to kill you, but if you have 2000 health at 100 protections, it takes 4000 raw damage to kill you. Add another 100 prots and it takes 6000 raw damage, add 100 again and it takes 8000, you get the picture. This is diminishing efficiency, not diminishing returns, since your effective health goes goes up by the same flat amount for each protection point you buy, but since this amount is flat, you're getting less value as a percentage of your total effective health each time. Going from 0 to 100 prots doubles your effective health, then going from 100 to 200 prots only increases it by a further 1.5x, then from 200 to 300 only increases it by a further 1.33x, etc. The TLDR of all of this is that buying more protections has diminishing returns on your mitigation multiplier, but because of effective health, there's actually only diminishing efficiency on your total tankiness. Meaning you get tankier at a constant rate for buying more protections, but because that rate is constant, you're getting a smaller increase as a percentage of your total tankiness. Okay, next up is a much simpler and quicker one. Penetration in Smite 2 no longer comes in physical and magical form. There is just flat penetration and percent penetration, and the only thing you care about are the other stats on the item, like if you want strength on Anher versus intelligence on Anubis, for example. There is also far less flat penetration available in Smite 2 than there was in Smite 1, but percent penetration is still highly available. And of course, flat penetration reduces the enemy's protections by a certain amount, and percent penetration reduces their protections by a certain percentage. So percent penetration is better against tanks and later in the game, and flat penetration is better against squishies with less total prots in the early game, but will suffer a little bit, especially against tanks or in the late game when squishies have more protections. Moving on though, crit chance remains basically the same as Smite 1 with the modern smoothing formula in place that makes it so you're more likely to land a crit if you haven't crit recently, and less likely to land a crit each time you land one in a row. The only real difference in Smite 2 is that any god can build any item, and that includes crit chance, so any magical gods from Smite 1 that you've always wanted to build crit on, you now can. Another quick one here, shields in Smite 2 can now stack in all cases. This was extremely weird in Smite 1 where some shields stacked, some shields didn't, and even some shields stacked if applied first but didn't stack if applied second. It was an absolute mess. In Smite 2 though, every shield stacks regardless of application order or size, and each shield is treated independently with the damage being taken from the shortest duration shield first. Next up we have attack speed, which is unchanged from Smite 1 as well and still applies as a percentage of your god's base attack speed. Most gods sit around 1.0 base attack speed, meaning a 20% increase gives you 0.2 on your attack speed, but some gods do benefit slightly more or slightly less from the same percentage increase depending on their base attack speed value. It's not a large enough difference to be worth considering in your builds, but it is cool to know that Agni technically benefits from attack speed more than Poseidon does, despite Pos having way more attack speed synergy in his kit. Moving on though, let's talk a bit about movement speed, which is mostly unchanged from Smite 1 if you already know how it works there. Other than the fact that you no longer scale up in speed for the first 7 levels like in Smite 1, you just start at full movement speed from level 1 in Smite 2. Movement speed, like attack speed, is applied as a percentage of your god's base movement speed, and like attack speed, you can mostly ignore this as the difference between the absolute fastest and absolute slowest god in terms of base movement speed is less than 5%. Movement speed, like a lot of mechanics in Smite and Smite 2, has diminishing returns built in, but they do work a little differently compared to protections and cooldown rate. Movement speed works off of a soft cap system, where after you hit a certain amount of total movement speed, any future benefits are reduced. The soft caps are at 457 and 540. Before hitting the first cap, any movement speed you acquire through items or abilities is full value. Between the two caps, you get 80% value, and then after the second cap at 540, you only get 50% value. As a general rule, it takes roughly 25% movement speed to hit the first cap, and another 25% to hit the second cap. The numbers are slightly different than this, but this is easy to remember as a general rule. So basically, your first 25% movement speed bought or got from abilities has no diminishing returns. Then your next 25% has only 4/5 value, and after that, all future movement speed is only half value. From this, you can generally use a rule of trying to avoid buying or obtaining more than 50% movement speed to avoid getting it so heavily reduced. It's not a hard cap, you will still get value from this, but it will be very inefficient to do so. The actual hard cap for movement speed is 1000, where you physically can't go any higher, but this is realistically impossible to achieve in game, especially with all movement speed being halved in value after 540. On the topic of movement though, next up are movement penalties, which remain unchanged from Smite 1 and function as follows. Backpedaling gives you a 40% penalty, strafing gives you a 20% penalty, ranged basic attacking gives you a 50% penalty, and melee basic attacking gives you a 35% penalty. Only the strongest of these penalties affecting you will be applied, so if you're strafing and melee basic attacking at the same time, you only suffer a 35% penalty, not 55%. But if you start backpedaling while melee basic attacking, your penalty goes up to 40%, as that is now the largest one affecting you. This is mostly applied in game for hunters, as the ranged basic attacking penalty is the largest of these at 50%, meaning if you are ranged basic attacking, you can strafe or backpedal without affecting your movement speed whatsoever. This can lead to situations like this where both ADCs are basic attacking but you are backing away, so their basic attacks miss, but they run into yours. If you still suffered a backpedal penalty in this case, then it wouldn't work, as you would move significantly slower than the enemy who is not backpedaling. But since ranged basic attacking is the largest penalty, you both move at the same speed regardless of who is strafing or backpedaling. And finally, on the topic of speed, we have slows, which, you guessed it, also suffer from diminishing returns in both Smite 1 and Smite 2. Slows in Smite add together, so if someone hits you with a 20% slow and then a 30% slow, you have an effective 50% slow on you. Once added together, if the slow effect is less than 40%, it suffers no diminishing returns whatsoever, but if it's higher than 40%, it goes through this formula. As mentioned, this formula has diminishing returns built in, and you can see if we plug in 100% to this slow formula, the output is 62.5%. This effectively means you will never be slowed more than 62.5% in Smite 2. There is also a movement speed floor at 150, which you can never go below either. Ability slows will always stack together, item slows only take the strongest one, and relic slows do not stack with each other, but do stack with abilities and items. So essentially, 2 relics that slow is pointless, 2 items that slow is pointless, but 2 abilities that slow will stack. So stack as many ability slows as you want, but only 1 item slow and only 1 relic slow. Then run that through the final number into the formula and you get the actual effective slow. Next up, we have crowd control diminishing returns, which have changed quite a bit from Smite 1 going into the new game. When hit by a hard CC, you gain a stack of diminishing returns, which reduces future hard CC's durations on you by 20%. In Smite 1, the max stacks for this was 4, for a total of 80% reduced CC times, and the stacks lasted 15 seconds. In Smite 2, however, this has changed to be a max stack count of 2 for a total of 40% reduction, and the stacks last 6 seconds instead of 15. This effectively means that instances of micro CC where diminishing returns reduces them down to the hard floor at 0.4 seconds will happen way less often, and CC duration should be more consistent across the board. Changes have also been made to compensate for CC being stronger as a result of this, as all gods going into Smite 2 have had a reduction to their overall CC durations. And finally, we have XP splitting and support bonus, which are unchanged from Smite 1. When splitting XP in Smite 2, a total pool of 120% of the initial XP value is shared between all recipients. This means that dual splitting gives 60% each, triple splitting gives 40% each, quad is 30%, and 5-man splitting is 24% each. This generally leads to a meta where dual splitting is acceptable since it technically increases your team-wide XP economy, but splitting with more than 2 only gives 40% or less of the initial value, and so is frowned upon in general, as if you're triple splitting, you're likely leaving farm up elsewhere on the map that one or more of you could be doing, while the other 2 duo split for more overall efficiency. Gold value has no bonus and is split evenly as well, so duo splitting on gold is 50% each, triple is 33% each, quad is 25%, and 5-man splitting gold is 20% each. Last hitting gives a 50% gold bonus, but only to the last hitter's share of that gold, so this is another reason why splitting between lots of players is bad, as a 50% increase on 100% of the gold value is far more effective than a 50% increase on 20% of the initial gold value. And finally, the support bonus is a mechanic that exists in Conquest only and activates after 2 minutes in. This grants the lowest XP player a 35% increase to their share of the split XP. This doesn't work if solo farming, only if splitting. This is in place to help supports not fall too far behind in Conquest. But that's everything I got on Smite 2's hidden mechanics. Some of these have changed quite dramatically from how Smite 1 handled things, while others remain the same, but hopefully this was useful for you in terms of deepening your understanding of the game. Don't forget to drop a like if this helped you out, and subscribe for all my future Smite 2 guides coming soon. Catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.